The stagecoach rattled into Miles City, Montana on a blistering afternoon in June of 1882, carrying a woman who kept her sleeves buttoned to her wrists despite the oppressive heat. And when Olivia Winston first stepped onto the dusty Main Street with her carpetbag clutched in trembling hands, she wondered if running toward an unknown future was any better than the nightmare she had left behind. The advertisement had been simple enough, placed by a rancher named Owen Whitmore, who needed a wife to help manage his homestead 20 miles outside of town. Nora Russell, as she now called herself, had responded with a carefully worded letter that mentioned her ability to cook, sew, and manage a household, but said nothing about the patchwork of scars that covered her arms and shoulders, souvenirs from a fire that had claimed her family's Boston tenement 3 years prior. She had been 20 years old then, and the flames had stolen more than just her parents and younger brother. They had taken her confidence, her sense of beauty, and very nearly her will to live. The train journey west had been long, followed by the final leg on the stagecoach, and now here she stood in this frontier town, waiting for a man she had never met to claim her as his mail-order bride. The main street bustled with activity even in the afternoon heat. Cowboys led horses to the livery, women in calico dresses hurried between the general store and the milliner's shop, and somewhere a piano played a jaunty tune that drifted from the saloon. Nora adjusted her bonnet and scanned the crowd, looking for someone who might be Owen Whitmore. The letter had described him as 30 years old, tall, with dark hair and a ranch that bred horses. It had been polite but not romantic, a business arrangement more than anything else. That suited her fine. Romance was for women who did not wake up screaming from nightmares about burning timbers and smoke that choked the life from your lungs. A man approached, and Nora felt her stomach tighten. He was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a face weathered by sun and wind. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue that seemed to cut right through her carefully constructed defenses. He wore simple ranch clothes, denim pants and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a battered hat in his hands. "Miss Russell." His voice was deep and warm with a gentle quality that surprised her. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Owen, please." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Was the journey difficult, long but manageable? She kept her responses brief, professional. This was a transaction, nothing more. "I have a wagon waiting. We can head to the ranch before nightfall if you are not too tired, unless you would prefer to stay in town tonight. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson. She is respectable," Nora considered. Part of her wanted to delay the inevitable, to put off arriving at this strange man's home where she would be expected to perform wifely duties. But another part, the practical part that had kept her alive through the worst moments of her life, knew that delaying would only make it harder. "I would prefer to continue to the ranch if that suits you." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps, or relief. "It suits me fine." He took her carpetbag, and she noticed his hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked his land himself rather than simply ordering others about. They walked to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 horses. Owen helped her up to the seat with surprising gentleness, his hand steady under her elbow, and then climbed up beside her. As they left Miles City behind, the landscape opened up into rolling plains dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the blue sky. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that matched something inside Nora. This land did not pretend to be soft or welcoming. It was honest about its harshness. "The ranch is called the Whitmore Horse Farm," Owen said, breaking the silence. "My father started it 20 years ago. He passed 2 years back and my mother followed 6 months later. I have been running it alone since then, but it is too much for one person. I need help, and I thought maybe I could provide a home for someone who needed one as much as I needed help." It was the most honest assessment of a mail-order bride situation Nora had ever heard. Most men dressed it up as romance or companionship, but Owen spoke plainly about mutual need. She appreciated that. "I am a hard worker," she said. "I will earn my keep." "I am sure you will." He glanced at her, and she saw curiosity in his expression but also patience. "You wrote that you lost your family. I am sorry for that. Thank you." The words were automatic, a response she had learned to give when people expressed condolences. But then, because something about this man made her want to be as honest as he was, she added, "It was a fire in Boston. That must have been terrible." It was. She fell silent, and to her relief, he did not press for details. They rode for nearly 2 hours, the silence between them gradually becoming less awkward and more companionable. Owen pointed out landmarks, a creek where he watered the horses, a stand of cottonwood trees that marked the boundary of his land, a rocky outcropping where eagles nested. His voice when he spoke of the land held genuine love, and Nora found herself relaxing slightly. The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well-maintained. A 2-story wooden house with a wide porch, a large barn, several corrals where horses grazed in the late afternoon sun, and a few outbuildings that she guessed were for storage and equipment. Everything looked sturdy and practical, built to last through harsh Montana winters. "It is not fancy," Owen said, and for the first time she heard uncertainty in his voice. "It looks like a good home." And she meant it. The house had a solidness to it that appealed to her, a sense of permanence that she had not felt since before the fire. He helped her down from the wagon, and she became acutely aware of how close they stood, how his hands lingered on her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. Her heart raced, but not entirely from fear. There was something else there, something she had thought burned out of her along with so much else. Inside, the house was clean and organized, though it had the slightly bare look of a place inhabited only by a man living alone. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy wooden table at the other. Stairs led to the second floor. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Owen said, setting her bag down. "The largest is mine. I thought you might want the one at the front of the house. It has a nice view of the sunrise. The third is small, more of a storage room really." Nora turned to him, surprised. "We will have separate rooms." Color rose in his cheeks, and she realized that, beneath his confidence, he was as nervous about this arrangement as she was. That is, we are strangers. I hoped we might become acquainted before we share a room, if that is acceptable to you." Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees went weak. She had been steeling herself for the wedding night, for the moment when she would have to reveal the extent of her scars, for the inevitable look of horror or disgust or pity that would cross his face. But he was offering her time, space, a chance to adjust. "That is very kind of you. It is only practical." But his eyes were kind when they met hers. "I will show you your room. We can have supper after you have had a chance to rest and freshen up." The room he showed her was indeed lovely, with a wide window that looked out over the prairie. The bed was covered with a simple quilt in shades of blue and cream, and there was a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror on the wall. It was more than she had expected, certainly nicer than the cramped boarding house room she had occupied in Boston while working as a seamstress to pay for her passage west. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is wonderful." Owen nodded, looking pleased. "I will be downstairs when you are ready." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Nora sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of pure emotion. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had not cried since the night of the fire, had not allowed herself that weakness. But sitting here in this quiet room, with the golden afternoon light streaming through the window and the sound of horses whinnying in the distance, she felt something crack in the armor she had built around her heart. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her hairbrush and the single photograph she had saved from the fire on top of the chest of drawers. The photograph showed her family before the tragedy, and she kept it not because looking at it brought comfort, but because forgetting them felt like a worse betrayal than remembering the pain. After washing her face and hands, she changed from her travel-stained dress into the nicer of her 2 gowns, a simple gray cotton with long sleeves and a high collar. Even here, even in the privacy of her own room, she kept herself covered. The scars ran from her wrists to her shoulders, angry raised tissue that had faded from red to white over the years, but remained prominent and undeniable. Her back bore similar marks, and there was a patch on her left side where the fire had been particularly cruel. Downstairs, she found Owen at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. The smell of beef and vegetables filled the air, and her stomach reminded her that she had not eaten since early morning. "I am not much of a cook," he said apologetically. "I can manage stew and bread and coffee, but not much beyond that. I'm hoping you will take pity on me. I can cook." It was one of the skills she had learned in the years since the fire, one of the ways she had made herself useful enough to survive. "I will happily take over kitchen duties." That would be a relief. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and cut thick slices from a loaf of bread that was only slightly burnt on the bottom. They sat at the table, and Nora was struck by the strangeness of the moment. Yesterday she had been alone in Boston. Today she was sharing a meal with a man who was legally her husband, or would be once they made it official with the preacher. "We should speak about the marriage," Owen said, as if reading her thoughts. "The preacher comes through Miles City once a month. He will be there in 2 weeks. I thought we might wait until then, make it legal and proper. Unless you would prefer to do it sooner, we could ride into town tomorrow if you wish. 2 weeks seems reasonable." It would give her time to adjust, to learn the rhythms of this new life before binding herself permanently to it. "Good." He ate a few bites of stew, then said, "I want you to know, Nora, that I will not force anything on you. This arrangement, it is about partnership and help, not about power or control. You are free to leave if you find you cannot stand it here, though I hope you will give it a fair chance." She studied him across the table, this tall, quiet cowboy who spoke about partnership when he could have simply demanded obedience. "Why did you choose a mail-order bride? A man like you, with a good ranch and honest work. Surely there are women in Miles City who would be interested." He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "There are a few, I suppose, but I am not good at the courting game, the pretty words and dances and social calls. And most of the women here, they have known me since I was a boy. They remember every foolish thing I did growing up." It felt easier somehow to start fresh with someone new, someone who did not have expectations already formed. It was an honest answer, and Nora respected him for it. "I understand that. Starting fresh can be a gift." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and afterward Nora insisted on washing the dishes while Owen went out to check on the horses one final time before nightfall. She stood at the window, watching him move through the corral with easy confidence, speaking softly to the animals who clearly trusted him. He had a gentle way about him despite his size, a quality she had not expected to find in a frontier rancher. That night, lying in her new bed with the window open to let in the cool evening air, Nora allowed herself to feel a cautious hope. Perhaps this would work. Perhaps she could build a life here, find purpose and even contentment. She did not dare hope for more than that. Love was for people whose hearts were whole, not for women who woke gasping from nightmares with the smell of smoke in their nostrils. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Nora rose early and prepared breakfast, learning what Owen liked and how to work with the supplies he had on hand. She took over the cooking and cleaning and also began to organize the house, adding small touches that made it feel more like a home. She found curtains in a trunk that had belonged to Owen's mother and hung them in the windows. She planted herbs in a small garden patch near the kitchen door. She mended Owen's shirts and sewed new cushions for the chairs. Owen worked from dawn until dusk, training horses and maintaining the ranch. He had contracts with the army to provide mounts, and he took pride in breeding animals that were strong, intelligent, and even tempered. In the evenings, he taught Nora about the ranch operation, explaining his breeding program and the financial aspects of running the business. She appreciated being treated as a partner rather than just a housekeeper. They talked during meals, slowly learning about each other. Owen told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's dream of building something lasting, about the hard winter 5 years ago that had nearly wiped out their herd. Nora spoke carefully about her life in Boston, about her father's work as a printer and her mother's skill with a needle, about her brother who had dreamed of becoming a teacher. She did not speak about the fire itself, and Owen did not push. But every evening when she changed for bed, every morning when she dressed, she was acutely aware of the scars hidden beneath her clothes. The summer heat was oppressive, and she longed to roll up her sleeves like Owen did, to feel air on her skin. But fear kept her covered, fear of the moment when he would see what the fire had done to her and realize he had made a terrible mistake. The day came for their trip to Miles City to meet with the preacher. Nora dressed in her best clothes, a navy blue dress with ivory lace at the collar, and tried to calm her racing heart. This would make it real, binding her to Owen and this life in a way that could not be easily undone. The ride to town was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. But when Owen helped her down from the wagon in front of the small church, his hand lingered on hers. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "You can still change your mind." She looked up at him, at this good man who had been nothing but kind to her, who had given her space and respect and a chance at a new beginning. "I am certain." The ceremony was brief and simple. The preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Thompson, asked the standard questions and pronounced them husband and wife. Owen kissed her cheek gently, formally, and she felt the warmth of his lips like a brand. They signed the papers, and just like that, Nora Russell became Nora Whitmore. Owen had arranged for them to have lunch at the hotel restaurant, a small celebration of their union. Over chicken and potatoes, he surprised her by pulling a small box from his pocket. "This was my grandmother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with 3 small garnets. "I thought you might like to have it. It is not much, but it belonged to a woman who built a life out here when there was nothing but wilderness." Nora's throat tightened as she looked at the ring. It was beautiful in its simplicity, and the thought that he wanted to give her something with family history touched her deeply. "It is perfect." He slid it onto her finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. She looked at the garnets glinting in the light and felt the weight of the ring, the promise it represented. On the ride back to the ranch, something had shifted between them. They were no longer strangers bound by a business arrangement. They were married partners, bound by law and promise if not yet by love. Nora felt the change like electricity in the air before a storm, both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. "Nora," Owen said softly, "I meant what I said about not forcing anything. But we are married now, and I confess I do not know what you expect from me, what you want from this arrangement." She turned to look at him, saw the uncertainty in his face, and realized he was as nervous about this as she was. He was trying so hard to be respectful, to give her control, but it left them both in a strange limbo. "I do not know either," she admitted. "I have never been married before. I have never even been courted properly. I suppose I thought we would let things develop naturally, that perhaps over time we might become comfortable with each other. I would like that." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. The touch sent shivers up her arm despite the warmth of the evening. "I find myself hoping we can become more than just business partners, Nora. You are a good woman, kind and strong. I admire you." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. But they also scared her, because admiration could turn to revulsion so quickly. She pulled her hand back gently, not wanting to hurt him but unable to bear the intimacy yet. "Give me time," she whispered. "Please. All the time you need." But she saw disappointment flicker in his eyes before he masked it. Another week passed. The heat continued to build, and one afternoon while Nora was kneading bread dough in the kitchen, sweat soaking through her dress, she felt dizzy and lightheaded. She tried to push through it, but the room began to spin and she had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. Owen, who had come in for water, was at her side instantly. "Nora, what is wrong? Just the heat. I will be fine. You are wearing too many clothes for this weather." His voice was concerned but also confused. "Why do you always keep yourself so covered? Even at night I hear you in your room and you never open your windows enough for a proper breeze." "I am fine," she insisted, pulling away from his supporting hand. "You are not fine. You nearly fainted." He studied her face, and she saw understanding begin to dawn. "Are you hiding something? Are you hurt?" "No, yes, I mean." She felt tears threaten and hated herself for the weakness. "Please, just let it be." But Owen was not the type of man to let things be when someone he cared about was suffering. "Nora, I am your husband. Whatever it is, you can tell me." The concern in his voice, the genuine care, broke through her defenses. She was so tired of hiding, so tired of carrying this burden alone. Maybe it was the heat, or maybe it was the kindness he had shown her over these past weeks, but suddenly she could not maintain the facade any longer. "The fire," she said, her voice barely audible. "It did not just kill my family, it burned me, my arms, my shoulders, my back. I am scarred, Owen. Badly. And I thought if I kept them hidden, if you did not see, then maybe you would not realize what a poor bargain you made when you sent for me." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Nora could not bear to look at his face, could not stand to see disgust or pity there. She stared at the floor, wishing it would open up and swallow her. "Let me see," Owen said softly. "No, Nora, please, let me see." There was something in his voice, a gentleness but also a firmness that made her finally look up. His eyes held no disgust, only compassion and a deep concern that made her want to cry. With shaking hands, she began to unbutton the cuff of her right sleeve. Her fingers fumbled with the small buttons, and after a moment, Owen reached out to help. She flinched but did not pull away. Slowly, carefully, he unfastened the buttons and rolled her sleeve up to her elbow, then above it to her shoulder. The scars were revealed in all their terrible glory. Patches of puckered skin, some white and smooth, others still slightly pink and textured. The burn had taken a pattern like a grotesque map across her arm, following where her nightgown had caught fire and melted into her skin. Owen said nothing, just looked, and Nora felt shame burn through her hotter than the flames had. Then, so gently she almost did not feel it, he touched her arm. His fingers traced the path of one scar from wrist to shoulder, not with revulsion but with something that felt almost like reverence. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "Sometimes. When it is very cold or when I am tired. Mostly it just looks terrible." "No." He looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "It looks like you survived something that should have killed you. It looks like you are strong and brave and absolutely beautiful. Do not lie to me." The words came out harsh, defensive. "Do not patronize me with false kindness." "I am not lying." He took both her hands in his, careful with the scarred one. "Nora, look at me. Really look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze, expecting to see pity or disgust lurking behind the kind words. But what she saw there was something entirely different. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he finds attractive, with warmth and interest and a desire that was unmistakable. "You think these scars make you ugly," he continued. "I think they make you remarkable. Every time I look at you, I see a woman who survived a tragedy that killed her family, who rebuilt her life, who traveled across the country alone to start over. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done. These scars are proof of your strength." How could I find that anything but beautiful? Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "You do not understand. They are everywhere, Owen. My arms, my shoulders, my back. I am not whole. I am broken. Then we are well matched because I am broken too." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her despite her resistance. "My parents died and left me alone here. I spent 2 years barely holding this place together, barely able to get out of bed some mornings. I sent for a mail-order bride because I was too damaged to court a woman properly, too afraid of rejection to even try. We are both scarred, Nora. Yours are just more visible than mine." She sobbed against his chest, years of pain and fear and shame finally finding release. He held her through it all, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring soft words of comfort. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back and looked at him through tear-swollen eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "For what? For being human. For surviving." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the remaining tears. "Nora Whitmore, you have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you hear me?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Now, we are going to address this heat situation properly. You are going to change into something lighter, with short sleeves if you have such a thing. And if you do not, we are going to alter one of your dresses. I will not have my wife fainting from heat because she is afraid to show her arms in her own home. But the scars are beautiful. Just like the rest of you." He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. That evening, wearing a chemise and skirt with her arms bare for the first time since arriving in Montana, Nora sat on the porch with Owen. The cool air on her skin felt like a blessing, and she realized how much she had been suffering in silence. Every time she caught Owen looking at her arms, she tensed, waiting for him to recoil. But he never did. He looked at her the same way he always had, with warmth and growing affection. "Tell me about the fire," he said quietly. "If you can. I think you have been carrying it alone for too long." So she told him. She described the tenement building where they had lived, 5 stories of timber and hope in a Boston neighborhood full of immigrants and laborers. She told him about waking in the night to screams and smoke, about trying to wake her family, about the way the fire spread so fast that there was barely time to think. She had gotten her little brother, Timothy, out of bed and pushed him toward the door. But then a beam had fallen and blocked their path. She had tried to shield him with her body while looking for another way out, but the flames had caught her nightgown, and then there was only pain and terror. "I do not remember much after that," she said, her voice flat with the recitation of horror. "I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. They told me Timothy had not made it, nor my parents. The landlord had been too cheap to maintain proper fire escapes. 32 people died that night. I was one of only 7 who survived." Owen listened without interrupting, his face grave. When she finished, he took her scarred hand and pressed it against his heart. "I am so sorry you went through that. I am sorry you lost them. And I am grateful, selfishly, that you survived. Because if you had not, you would not be here, and I cannot imagine this place without you now." His words settled into her heart like seeds finding fertile soil. For the first time since the fire, she began to believe that perhaps she could have a future, that perhaps she was more than just her scars and her trauma. Over the following weeks, something blossomed between them. With the secret of her scars no longer a barrier, Nora found herself relaxing around Owen. She wore short sleeves during the day, stopped flinching when he touched her arm or shoulder. He continued to treat her with gentleness and respect. But now there was also affection in his touches, warmth in his glances that made her heart race. They worked together on the ranch, falling into an easy partnership. Nora proved to have a talent with the horses, a gentle patience that the animals responded to. Owen taught her to ride, his hands steadying her in the saddle, his voice calm and encouraging. She learned to rope and brand, to mend fences and muck out stalls. The work was hard but satisfying in a way that sewing in a cramped Boston room had never been. In the evenings, they sat together and talked about everything and nothing. Owen told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand the breeding program and maybe add some cattle. Nora spoke about wanting to plant a proper garden, maybe start keeping chickens. They were building a life together, piece by piece, and Nora felt herself falling for this quiet, kind cowboy who had seen her scars and called her beautiful. One night, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of prairie grass, and Nora felt content in a way she had not known was possible. "Owen," she said softly, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a home, for treating me with kindness, for seeing past my scars to the person underneath." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Nora, I need you to understand something. I do not see past your scars. I see them very clearly, but they do not diminish you in my eyes. If anything, they make me love you more." Her breath caught. "Love?" "Yes, love." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I know we started this as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way I fell in love with you. With your strength and your gentleness, your determination and your kindness. With the way you hum when you cook and the way you talk to the horses. With all of you, scars included." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy rather than pain. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was afraid to even hope for love, but somehow you made it possible." He leaned in and kissed her, not the formal peck from their wedding day, but a real kiss, deep and tender and full of promise. She kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, feeling his strength and warmth and the steady beat of his heart against hers. That night, for the first time, she went to his room. In the lamplight, she undressed slowly, revealing not just her arms but all her scars. The ones on her shoulders and back, the patch on her side. Owen looked at each one and then he kissed them, his lips gentle on the damaged skin, showing her without words that every part of her was precious to him. Their lovemaking was tender and sweet, a joining that felt like coming home. Afterward, Lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Nora felt a peace she had not known since before the fire. She was safe here, loved here, whole here in a way that had nothing to do with scarred or unscarred skin. The seasons turned. Summer faded into fall, and Nora planted winter vegetables in her garden while Owen prepared the ranch for the cold months ahead. They worked together, laughed together, built a life together. When the first snow fell, covering the prairie in white, Nora stood at the window watching it with Owen's arms around her waist, marveling at the beauty of this harsh land that had become home. By Christmas, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with small touches that Nora had added. Evergreen boughs hung over the doorways, and she had sewn new quilts for the beds. On Christmas morning, Owen surprised her with a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, soft wool in deep red. "I thought it might keep you warm when you go out to feed the chickens," he said, looking almost shy. She had started keeping chickens in the fall, building a coop with Owen's help. They provided eggs and occasionally meat, and she had grown fond of the silly birds. The shawl was perfect, practical but also beautiful. "I love it," she said, kissing him. "I have something for you as well." She handed him a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside were 2 shirts she had made, stitched with care from fabric she had ordered from the general store. They were well made, fitted to his frame and embroidered at the collar with his initials. "Nora, these are wonderful." He held one up, admiring the workmanship. "You have such skill with a needle. I wanted to make you something special. To thank you for this year, for everything you have given me." He pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "You have given me just as much. More, really. You have given me a home again, not just a house. You have given me companionship and partnership and love. You have made me happier than I thought possible." That winter was hard, as Montana winters always are. Snow piled high, and the temperatures dropped to brutal levels. But inside their snug home, Nora and Owen were warm and content. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud or playing cards or simply talking. They made love with increasing confidence and passion, learning each other's bodies and preferences, finding joy in the physical expression of their love. By spring, Nora knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Owen. One morning over breakfast, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. The look of pure joy that crossed his face made her heart soar. "Truly. Truly. I think the baby will come in early fall, September or October." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "This is the best news, Nora, the absolute best news." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Nora continued to work on the ranch, though Owen became increasingly protective as her belly swelled. He insisted she not lift anything heavy, that she rest often, that she eat plenty of good food. She found his concern endearing, though sometimes exasperating. "Women have babies all the time," she reminded him when he fretted over her riding out to check on a mare. "I am not made of glass. No, but you are precious, and I will not risk you or our child." She could not argue with the love in his voice, so she compromised. She did lighter tasks, spent more time in the garden and with the chickens, and let Owen handle the heavier ranch work. She sewed baby clothes and knitted tiny caps, preparing for their new arrival with excitement and just a touch of fear. The baby came on a cool September evening. Owen rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, who had delivered half the babies in Miles City. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nora thought of her own mother, wished desperately that she could be there to guide her through this. But Mrs. Patterson was skilled and calm, and Owen refused to leave her side. holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Finally, as dawn broke over the prairie, their son entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. Owen wept openly as he held the tiny, squalling infant, and Nora felt her heart expand to accommodate this new, overwhelming love. They named him Timothy Owen Whitmore, honoring both her lost brother and his father. Little Timothy was perfect, with dark hair like his father and a lusty cry that suggested he would have no trouble making his presence known. Those first months were exhausting and wonderful. Nora marveled at the tiny person they had created, at his small fingers and toes, at the way he looked at her with solemn eyes as if trying to figure out the world. Owen was a devoted father, walking the floor with Timothy when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. As Timothy grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. Owen's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and he was able to expand his operation. They hired a young man named Jacob to help with the daily work, giving Owen more time to spend with his family. When Timothy was 3, Nora became pregnant again. This time it was a daughter, born on a spring morning with flowers blooming in the garden. They named her Rose Margaret after Owen's mother and Nora's grandmother. Rose had her mother's delicate features but her father's blue eyes, and she was a calm, sweet-natured baby who rarely cried. The years passed in a happy blur. Timothy grew into a sturdy boy who loved horses and followed his father everywhere. Rose was a gentle soul who spent hours in the garden with her mother, learning the names of plants and how to coax them to grow. Nora had never imagined she could be this happy, that the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Miles City, terrified and scarred and hopeless, could build a life this full of love and purpose. One summer evening when Timothy was 10 and Rose was 7, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Timothy was telling an elaborate story about the horse he was training, gesturing wildly with his hands, while Rose braided flowers into a crown. Owen sat with his arm around Nora and she leaned into his warmth, content. "Mama," Rose said suddenly, looking at Nora's bare arms, "how did you get those marks?" It was a question the children had asked before, but they were older now, ready for the full truth. Nora glanced at Owen, who nodded encouragingly. "When I was younger, before I came to Montana, there was a fire," she said quietly. "It hurt me, and it left these scars, but it also taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive terrible things and still build a good life." "Does it hurt?" Timothy asked, his young face serious. "Not anymore. Sometimes in winter when it is very cold, but mostly no." "Papa says they are beautiful," Rose said matter-of-factly. "He says they show how brave you are." Nora looked at her daughter, then at her husband, tears blurring her vision. "Your papa is a wise man." "The wisest," Owen agreed, kissing her temple. That night, after the children were in bed, Nora and Owen sat together in their room. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman she had become. Her scars were still there, would always be there, but they no longer defined her. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a woman who had survived tragedy and found joy on the other side. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined," she said softly. "When I answered your advertisement, I was not looking for love. I was not even looking for happiness, just survival. But you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to believe in tomorrow." "You gave me the same," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "I was existing, not living, before you came. You brought light and love into this house, into my life. You made everything better." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved. He had a few more lines around his eyes now, some gray threading through his dark hair, but he was still the same kind, steady cowboy who had seen her scars and called her beautiful. "I love you, Owen Whitmore," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I love you, Nora Whitmore, today and always." They kissed, a deep, lingering kiss that still held passion even after years of marriage. Then they went to bed, wrapped in each other's arms, two scarred souls who had found healing in love. More years passed, bringing changes and challenges, but always love. Timothy grew into a fine young man who took over much of the daily ranch work, showing his father's skill with horses and his mother's patience. Rose married a teacher from Miles City and moved into town, though she visited often with her own growing family. Nora and Owen became grandparents, delighting in the new generation. The ranch continued to prosper. Owen and Timothy expanded the operation, adding cattle to their horse breeding. Nora's garden grew larger each year, providing vegetables for their family and extras to sell in town. The house that had seemed so bare when Nora first arrived was now filled with life and laughter, with photographs on the walls and children's drawings pinned to the kitchen door. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Nora with a trip to Miles City for a celebration dinner at the hotel. It was a rare treat, and Nora dressed in her finest gown, a deep blue silk that Owen had bought her the previous Christmas. She wore her hair up, and the garnet ring he had given her on their wedding day glinted on her finger. As they ate and talked and remembered their years together, Nora found herself marveling at the journey they had taken. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been, hiding her scars beneath long sleeves in the summer heat, convinced that she was too damaged to deserve love. She thought about Owen's patience and kindness, the way he had seen past her defenses to the person underneath. "What would you tell her?" Owen asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Tell who?" "That young woman who stepped off the stagecoach 20 years ago. If you could go back and talk to her, what would you say?" Nora considered the question seriously. "I would tell her that the worst thing that ever happened to her would not define the rest of her life. That healing takes time, but it is possible. That she is stronger and braver than she knows. And that somewhere in Montana, there is a man who will love her exactly as she is, scars and all." "I would tell her the same," Owen said softly. "Except I would add that she should hurry up and get here because I cannot wait to meet her." They laughed together, and then Owen raised his glass. "To 20 years of marriage and to 20 more. To scars that tell stories of survival. To love that heals old wounds. And to you, Nora, the bravest and most beautiful woman I have ever known." She clinked her glass against his, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "To us, and to the life we have built together." As they rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Nora leaned against Owen's shoulder and felt completely at peace. The scars on her arms and shoulders and back were still there, faded now to silvery white but permanent. But they no longer represented tragedy to her. They represented survival, strength, and the journey that had brought her to this moment, to this man, to this life she loved with all her heart. Years continued their steady march. Nora and Owen grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good years. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming richer and more comfortable like a well-worn quilt. Timothy married a local girl named Sarah, and they took over the main ranch operations, building their own house on the property but close enough that the family remained connected. He and Sarah had 4 children, keeping the Whitmore name and legacy alive. Rose and her husband gave Nora and Owen 3 more grandchildren, all of whom spent summers on the ranch learning to ride and rope and appreciate the land. On quiet evenings, Nora and Owen would sit on their porch, watching the sun set over the prairie they both loved. Sometimes they talked about the old days, remembering their first awkward weeks together, laughing about how far they had come. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, content in each other's presence. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked one such evening when they were both in their 60s. Sending for a mail-order bride instead of courting someone local. Owen turned to her with genuine surprise. "Regret? Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora. The very best. Even though I came with so much baggage, with scars and nightmares and fear, especially because of that." He lifted her scarred hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Those scars made you who you are. They taught you compassion and strength. Without them, without your past, you might have been a different person, and I love exactly who you are." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and prairie wind. "I used to think the fire took everything from me. My family, my home, my beauty, my future. But maybe it gave me something too. It brought me here to you, to this life. I cannot be glad it happened, but I can be grateful for where it led me." "That is all any of us can do," Owen said. "Make the best of what we are given, find joy where we can, and love with all our hearts." They sat together as darkness fell, and the stars emerged, countless points of light scattered across the vast Montana sky. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the voices of their grandchildren who were staying the week, the sound of laughter and life continuing. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had worked and loved and built a legacy upon. Nora thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from the burning tenement in Boston to this peaceful porch in Montana. She thought about the scars she bore, inside and out, and how they had become part of her story rather than the end of it. She thought about Owen, who had looked at her damaged body and seen beauty, who had offered her respect and patience and eventually deep, abiding love. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Owen asked. "For seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," he replied. "For trusting me with your heart, even when you were afraid. For choosing to stay and build something beautiful here." They kissed, a sweet, familiar kiss that still made Nora's heart flutter even after decades of marriage. Then they went inside, hand in hand, to join their grandchildren for the evening meal. The years were kind to them, granting them long lives and good health. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch thrived under Timothy's management, carrying on the legacy Owen's father had started so many years ago. When Owen finally passed at the age of 83, it was peacefully in his sleep after a full day of watching his great-grandson ride his first pony. Nora held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering her love and gratitude for a lifetime shared. She mourned him deeply, but she did not break. He had taught her too well about strength and resilience. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with family, tending her beloved garden and sitting on the porch remembering. When her own time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who bore testament to the love she and Owen had shared. They buried her next to Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Montana sky they had both loved. The tombstone was simple, bearing both their names and the dates of their lives. But if you looked closely, you could see something else carved there, words Timothy had chosen to honor his parents. "Here lie Owen and Nora Whitmore." He saw her scars and called her beautiful. She saw his loneliness and gave him home. Together they built a legacy of love. And on summer evenings when the wind blows across the prairie, and the sunset paints the sky in shades of orange and purple, people say you can still feel the love that lived in that house. still sense the echo of two souls who found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The ranch continues to this day, run by Owen and Nora's descendants, each generation adding their own chapter to the story that began with a frightened young woman stepping off a stagecoach and a lonely cowboy brave enough to see beauty in scars. Their story became legend in Miles City, passed down through generations as a reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that beauty exists in survival, and that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on the unknown. Young women considering mail-order bride arrangements would hear the tale and take courage. Scarred veterans returning from wars would remember Owen's words and hold their heads a little higher. But the greatest legacy Owen and Nora left was not in the stories told about them or the ranch that bore their name. It was in the love they shared freely and fully, holding nothing back. It was in the family they built, each member carrying forward the lessons of compassion and acceptance they had learned from their matriarch and patriarch. It was in the simple truth that love sees not with eyes but with the heart, and that real beauty has nothing to do with perfection, and everything to do with authenticity, courage, and the willingness to be vulnerable with another soul. The prairie remembers them still, in the whisper of wind through grass and the cry of eagles overhead. The house remembers them in creaking floorboards and sun-warmed wood. The land remembers them in every hoofbeat, every sunrise, every moment of peace found in hard work and honest living. And somewhere in whatever lies beyond this life, two souls rest together, scarred and whole, broken and healed, forever beautiful in each other's eyes. The mail-order bride who had scars she tried to hide found a cowboy who saw them and called her beautiful. Together they proved that the deepest wounds can become the foundation for the greatest love, and that sometimes the most damaged hearts are capable of the most extraordinary healing. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a journey ended, and yet also eternal. For love like theirs does not truly end. It continues in the hearts of those who knew them, in the legacy they built, in the land they loved, and the lives they touched. Every sunset over the prairie, every horse running free, every grandchild learning to ride, every couple choosing to see beauty in imperfection carried forward the spirit of Owen and Nora Whitmore. And that, perhaps, is the truest measure of a life well lived. Not in the absence of scars, but in the courage to reveal them. Not in perfection, but in the messy beauty of being fully human. Not in avoiding pain, but in choosing love anyway, again and again, until the very end and beyond.